of the Audit and Standards Committee and extend my thanks to all members, officers and external partners in attendance. This committee plays a vital role in ensuring that Staffordshire County Council maintains the highest standards of governance, financial probity and ethical conduct. The matters before us today reflect the breadth and depth of our oversight responsibilities, and I am grateful for the continued diligence and professionalism with which members approach this work. Okay, with that, we'll start. Do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillor Luca and Councillor Munro.
Do we have any declarations of interest?
Good morning, Chair, members. I need to declare an interest in item 8 due to being on the panel looking at the Employment Tribunal case number 2. It's a non-pecuniary interest for obvious reasons, but it would pose potential conflict of interest, and I won't take part in the debate on that item.
Of meeting held on the 8th of July 2025. Is everybody in agreement with the minutes? Yeah. Okay. Exclusion of the public. That the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business which involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A, amended of the Local Government Act 1972 as indicated below. Okay, members, this meeting may be filmed for live or subsequent broadcast via the County Council's website and YouTube. This will be archived for 12 months. So the readmission of the public, going to item 13, update on the audit of financial statements and the value for money, which is KPMG. Thank you.
Good morning, committee. Thank you, Chair. So, I suppose just to introduce myself, I'm Robert Fenton. I'm the External Audit Manager. I think you've met Richard before, the last Audit Committee, Audit and Standards Committee. So, Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give a very brief update on the status of the audit to date. So, in terms of where we are, we've made some really good progress on the auditing the income and expenditure statement. So, looking at sort of costs, income, grants, for example, but there's still a bit of work to do on the sort of balance sheet. So, things around PPE, your assets, and land and buildings, pension obligations, debtors and creditors. But we're broadly happy with where we are. I think we've made better progress this year than we did last year, but mindful there's still a bit of a journey to go. And I suppose this verbal update ties in well with our next presentation to sort of give a bit of this is where we are with the audit. There's a lot of work to do to what we call building back assurance, which I'll go into a bit more detail in the presentation. But as I say, I think we're broadly happy with the progress. And as I say, we can provide another verbal update in November. At the November Audit Standards Committee, October Audit Standards Committee, we can provide another verbal update and also bring our draft auditor's annual report, and that'll have some detailed commentary around our value for money risk assessment, with a view that we will then provide a sort of final audit findings report in February 26, which is in line with the timetable for delivery. In terms of value for money, again, we're still in the sort of planning and risk assessment stage of that. As I said, we'll look to bring a sort of update report in November. But I'll just pause there. I mean, I'm happy to move on to the presentation, but if anyone's got any particular questions on the sort of audit progress to date, then happy to take any questions.
Okay, moving on to item 14. This will be a little training session, the scope of external audit from KPMG again. Thank you.
I'll kick this off if that's okay, Chair. And then we'll kind of do it as a bit of a double act, because I'm sure this was the session that you were all looking forward to when you saw the agenda. 15 minutes on external audit. If ever there was going to be something to keep you on the edges of your chairs, I'm sure this was going to be it. I mean, basically what we've done is we've put together some slides. There's a variety, quite a bit of detail in there, but we wanted to cover off our main areas of responsibility, conscious that you're a relatively new committee and members will have varying degrees of experience in terms of sitting on a committee, audit committee at a local authority, and obviously, and the other thing is the financial statements and the external audit process is really quite daunting in terms of absorbing, the information that we bring to you. You'll get a set of financial statements which has got well over 100 pages in it. You'll hear us talking about value for money, commentaries, and then that's even before we start to get into how we actually report, because the sector has been in a real state of turmoil from an external audit process whereby opinions haven't been issued on the financial statements that are clean for quite a few years. So we're trying to navigate our way through a variety of different challenges, and we've decided that we'll try and kind of do that in the next 15 minutes and bring you up to speed. But Rob and I will sort of take the elements of the presentation between us, but at the same time, if you've got any questions or we start talking in language that you don't, isn't familiar, please just shout out, because you have to remember we're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis and inevitably use terminology that isn't part of a normal person's lexicon. So just flicking on, Robbie. So you've met me before. I'm on the left there, although my picture looks like the size of a postage stamp. So I'm Richard, and I'm responsible for signing the financial statements, opinion, and also issuing the value for money commentary. And then I'm supported by Rob on my left here, who's really experienced senior manager, and then Priya as well, who does the vast majority of our day-to-day work, and we end up taking the credit for all all the effort that she and the team put in. But between us, we've worked with staffs now for, this is our second year, but in terms of local government experience, you know, we've been brought up, I suppose, auditing councils. We had a period away for a few years whilst we weren't part of the framework contract that awards the external audit contracts to council work. But you know, we're now back doing work that is very much part of our core day-to-day activity. So yeah, that's our core team, and then we're supported by, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 other people. We bring in specialists to support us with pensions and valuations, and you know, the more IT, which is an ever important part of our work. So it's certainly not just the two of us who look after the audit. Goodness me, there, Tiny. We'll share these slides around on the afterwards, if that's okay, Liam. Is that? Yeah. So you can read them in your own time.
Yeah, apologies that you can't read that, so let me just let me illuminate a little bit. So, I mean, I know that obviously in the last Audit and Standards Committee, Richard presented the audit plan as well, and he gave quite a sort of comprehensive overview of the key elements of our financial statements work in particular, in terms of, you know, our roles, what, you know, significant risks, materiality. But I'll touch on it very briefly, and I'll try and build in a bit more around our value for money work as well. So, I mean, primarily, our purpose is to give a true and fair view of the authority's financial position, but also ensure that the accounts are also in line with the SITFA Code of Practice. So that's this sort of fundamental accounting, interpretation of accounting standards for the purpose of local government, and ensuring the accounts comply with that. I put a little bit there on the narrative statement. That's the sort of front half of the statement of accounts. We don't audit that as such. We're not looking at every number, every letter in there. What we look to do with that report is check that it's consistent with the financial statements. So you might have a couple of numbers in there that you can tie back to the financial statements. For example, spend on capital, for example. We would look to make sure that is consistent. But equally, again, there are certain things to be included in that narrative statement that through the requirements of the SITFA Code, that we look to ensure it is included. And also the annual governance statement sort of sits alongside the narrative statement, the annual report. And again, we picked that up as part of value for money work, and again, look to ensure consistency or understanding of the organisation. In terms of materiality, I think that Richard did touch on that at the last committee, but I think it's important to note that we cannot audit every single number. The gross expenditure of the authority is 1.5 billion this year, 24-25, and so we set a materiality level which we deem to be appropriate for the users of the accounts. Where if there was a difference above that, that would cause significant or influence the users of the accounts. And so, you know, we sample using statistical analysis, and we use materiality and what we call our performance materiality to set our statistical sort of sampling parameters. And this gives us then, with a view to giving us statistical coverage over the accounts that we undertake. So that's a sort of quantitative element of materiality, but there's also a qualitative element as well. So areas such as officers' remuneration, related parties, you're looking at much smaller values there, but we'd obviously be looking to ensure that we're comfortable, one, with the sort of process controls in place to get to those figures, but also look at those with a sort of closer eye and an additional sort of accuracy. And if there were differences there, even it may be a couple of £1,000, we would look, given they are disclosed to the pound almost in the accounts, we would look to make sure they are accurately presented. I must say.
Just saying that, so that materiality, so in terms of like the accounts, I would encourage you to go onto the website and download them. They're a massive document, but the front end is really, you can read the front end, it's narrative, and it provides a lot of colour around the, the numbers that are in the back end. A lot of those are impenetrable in terms of trying to understand exactly what they mean, and they're following accounting standards. But the front end is, I was going to say a good read, but no, it provides a lot of detail. £30 million is our materiality threshold. So that basically means if something was £20 million wrong, we'll record it, we'll note it down, but kind of it's not going to change whether or not I'll sign the accounts off. So you kind of, your responsibility as a committee here is to take assurance that the accounts are materially correct. So obviously when we talk about some of the values, they're clearly trivial to what we're looking at, when we've heard about some of the write-off levels, etc., etc. So it's just, I think, important to remember, what our responsibilities are, and equally what your responsibilities are in terms of challenging us. The numbers are massive. So we're never going to get down to that level of detail across all of those numbers. But Rob's absolutely right around those more sensitive aspects. Officers' remuneration, we want that to be right pretty much to the pound, to be quite honest. So the numbers, those more sensitive disclosures are far more, where we focus far more, or disproportionate amount of attention.
Thanks, Rick. And I suppose in terms of our significant risks, those I've repeated those that were presented in the plan around the valuation of land and buildings and the valuation of post-retirement, the pension obligation. And again, hugely material figures in there with quite inherent estimation and uncertainty, a lot of judgment and assumptions that go in there that it's sort of beyond the control of the authority, where experts are used. You've got the valuers of the land and buildings and then actuaries for the pensions. Quite complex calculations there, and we've got to get comfortable that the assumptions adopted by the value and then obviously adopted by management in the accounts are reasonable. And that's why they're sort of badged as significant risk of misstatement, because that's where there's the most likelihood of misstatement in the financial statements. Just in terms of outputs, I've obviously touched on the audit plan that was presented in April and July. The audit findings report, that will sort of give us that will give us a conclusion on the audit when we get to be able to conclude on the final elements of our work and report back on those significant risks and indeed any other areas that we need to bring to your attention. That will be what we bring in February next year. I also briefly mentioned the auditor's annual report. That's predominantly contains our public commentary on the value for money, but does sort of summarise our work in the financial statements as well. That's quite a high level. We are required to bring a draft version of the auditor's annual report to the November. We'll present it to management by the end of November this year, and that'll be a continuous deadline. But what we will bring is our draft version, because obviously the audit will still be underway. I've put a visual, again, you probably can't read it, but apologies. It is in our audit plan. This is purely a drop from our audit plan. So just to give you a bit of idea on the cycle of events, I think obviously there we're looking at that reporting period, sort of February, January time. We've got some more slides about how we're looking to bring that reporting deadline forward in line with the FRC guidance. But at this point, we'll be reporting in February next year.
I think the thing that, regardless of whether you can see the text on there, the thing that you can see is it's pretty much continuous. So, and that's a big challenge for finance, in so much as, years ago it would have been, we'd come in, we'd do a bit of work in January, we'd do a bit of work in March, and then you'd see us from a few weeks at the end of July, and bish bash bosh would issue an audit opinion. But it doesn't work like that anymore. It's pretty much continuous. And officers are managing their day-to-day responsibilities with the questions that we're asking to produce more and more detailed information about really, really technical aspects. And the technical aspects are driven by the expectations that we have to deliver against. The auditing standards that are just getting ever more rigorously enforced and policed. So it is a really kind of demanding process, and then obviously you layer on internal audit and all of the other kind of checks and balances that are taking place. I suppose maybe it isn't quite so much of a surprise that we don't necessarily we're unable to meet the deadlines that we have done maybe in yesteryear.
So there's a couple of bullets in there around, you know, the role of the audit committee, and it is effectively holding, you know, us and the council to account for the delivery of the financial statements and making sure they are, you know, given a true and fair view. I think it's about understanding the role of the audit committee is about seeking those assurances rather than any sort of decision-making sort of responsibilities. And equally, you know, if there are sort of control failings that we identify, that you want to look for assurances from management that they have got actions in place, just like you've been doing with the internal audit reports that you've received earlier in this committee. The same principles apply for the findings of the external audit as well. That's just the note about ensuring that you have the necessary skills to do this, and indeed, we'd be happy to provide additional support if there are gaps in your understanding of the financial statements or indeed process. Obviously, this is sort of session is hoping to sort of support that to a certain extent. As I say, be happy to pick up any additional questions on the role of the audit committee if needed.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing is, like, Rob and I sit on we attend lots and lots of audit committees. I think my observation is where the committee, in this setting, it's probably one of the only committees in the council, I'd imagine, where you haven't got a kind of an operational role. It's kind of cross-party, independent might be the wrong word, but you know, you're working together to challenge the decisions that, to challenge, to gain assurance over decisions that have been made or actions that have been taken. And I think if you can, the committees that work really well are able to keep focus on that as the terms of reference, rather than necessarily straying away into, because otherwise meetings end up being really, really long and get, you know, clearly there's a key role there for the chair to make sure that the business is kept on time and that appropriate discussion takes place over specific agenda items that are presented. But certainly from my experience, the committees that work well are where the remit sticks on the recommendations that are in the paper and seeking assurances over those recommendations, rather than necessarily, you know, going off in you know, inevitably agenda items can lead you all over the place, but it's around making sure that you kind of keep that relatively narrow focus. And then if a topic needs to go to a different scrutiny or operational committee, then maybe that's the right course of action. You know, I think that's certainly my observations.
Thanks, Rick. So we've touched on obviously the financial statements work, but obviously the VIFE money work we do is obviously a big part of our delivery. And so just to sort of go over, again, these slides should be broadly similar to what was presented in the audit plan in terms of what constitutes VIFE money, but effectively, and it links in well to your role as for seeking assurances. Effectively, this is what we're doing, looking to seek for assurances to check that the arrangements, the key thing here, the key word being, this is the arrangements in place to deliver VIFE money. And it's across three criteria, the financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. And, you know, there's quite a lot of work that goes into establishing what are the sort of key processes and controls in place at the authority to get that sort of baseline understanding of those arrangements. So the next slide just talks about what are we doing when we're looking at the planning, and we're looking at the AGS, the narrative statement. We're reviewing those internal control frameworks, but there's a lot of inspection of documentation in terms of, you know, key decisions. Are they going to committee? Are they being challenged at cabinet, council, wherever the scheme and delegation requires? And then through that, we would then identify if there are any sort of risks of significant weakness in arrangements. And so we're at that stage now, and when we come back at the end of October, we will look to provide a sort of high-level commentary on our risk assessment to date, and determine if there are any sort of areas of weakness, or any risks of weakness that we've identified to date. Sorry, I can't even read the screen. I need to need my glasses. In terms of the sort of factors which may indicate a potential significant weakness, some of those are presented at the next slide. It's where there is potential exposure to significant financial loss of risk. So we do get, as you can imagine, the sector is under significant financial pressure. A lot of local authorities are struggling to meet that sort of balanced budget. That would be a sort of immediate risk of significant weakness. But if we then determine that the arrangements in place to sort of manage that financial risk is appropriate, we wouldn't necessarily identify a significant weakness. Again, the key word being arrangements in place. Other examples of weakness be where there could be a significant impact on quality or effectiveness of service. So, for example, if there are issues with particular services that we can't see in evidence that actions are being taken, that there are appropriate governance arrangements to take the necessary action, again, we might want to flag that as a risk of significant weakness. So they're just a couple of examples of potential areas that you might want to identify as significant weakness. And equally, if we do find a weakness in 1 year, we would then look to sort of follow that through and confirm that the recommendations that have been that we put in place have been actioned accordingly, and then provide an update on that in the next financial year. There's an example on there around, I sort of touched on it in terms of, what could be a potential weakness around financial sustainability, where you've got, for example, unidentified saving gaps in the MTFS, and if the authority, for example, didn't have a necessary arrangement to sort of develop and monitor those savings, we would identify that as a weakness, for example. I'll hand over to Richard now to talk a bit more detail about the reason for the audit delays and the backstop. And I think if you recall when I was talking before about that building back assurance, obviously we're looking to get assurances over the financial statements for the year to 24-25, but there's a piece of work that we need to do to get to the historic position and the disclaimers that have been provided by previous auditors, and how we get to sort of rebase where we are as from a financial statements perspective.
Just out of interest, I mean, it's kind of like part of our I've been coming to this committee, and we often talk about the audit delays that are experienced. Are you all familiar with the fact that like the accounts weren't fully audited for quite a few years? So there's a slide on here that just explains why some of that. I mean, we weren't active in the market when some of the challenges were manifesting themselves, but equally we kind of experienced it in other sectors. There has been a real kind of some very specific challenges in the accounts. I talked about that technicality, that there was really unclear guidance around how to value different layers of roads and things like this. Some real technical issues. There's capacity constraints within the audit profession. The fees weren't high enough to allow the audit firms to deliver the audit. So there's a whole plethora, almost like a perfect storm of issues that arose, and coincided with COVID and the lockdowns and goodness knows what else, which ultimately meant that your accounts and the vast majority of other councils' accounts the audits just weren't concluded. So the government and the accounts regulators and SIPFA, who are kind of the standard setters for local government, put their heads together with the National Audit Office and the firms, and they've worked out a programme to basically right this issue. And it's going to take a few years because we'll come on to a little bit of that in a bit. But what they've effectively done is introduce, it's unprecedented, a process called the backstop process. So this doesn't apply in any other sector. It's never been applied in any other sector, private sector, or any other area of the of the public sector, to try and navigate through this. And the process is basically to draw lines under each of the financial year's audits, but to get as far as possible by that date, with a view to trying to kind of incrementally deliver more and more of an audit until hopefully by 2028 we get back to where we should be, which is a bit mind-boggling that it takes so long to do that rebuild process. So on the screen there is the backstop. So we issued the 23-24 accounts in February 2025. So we disclaimed those accounts. I think at the December previously you got the whatever was outstanding from the previous auditor's process covered off. We made quite a lot of progress in 23-24, but we didn't make enough progress to be able to sign off the accounts as complete. You know, that was unrealistic to expect us to be able to do so. But each of those dates basically is designed to try and go through this process of building back assurance. There's a lot of detail in there, but basically where we're at is we're issuing a disclaimer opinion. I expect that I'll issue a disclaimer opinion this year and probably next year as well, before maybe we start to think about moving towards what's called a qualified opinion, and then hopefully full assurance in future years. So disclaimer basically just means that we haven't got enough. There's a pervasive issue and we haven't got enough assurance to be able to sign off the financial statements. We've done some work across a lot of areas, but not enough work to be able to say that that number in the accounts is free from the material error that I talked about. And it's quite difficult. I struggle with it myself to try and kind of conceptualize that. But if you think about a set of accounts, they might include a balance like accruals. So that's like where you've incurred expenditure, but you've made an estimate of what it might be. Next year, that will reverse itself out, and then you'll put the actual numbers in. And so each year, whilst we haven't got the assurance over that brought forward position, so we've never got the ability to work out what the flip out is into our following year's accounts, so the reversal. And that covers there's quite a few areas of the accounts, particularly the income and expenditure account, where that issue arises. Areas like reserves. So, you know, if you're putting money into a specific area, you know, you need to know that what you started with was correct to know where you get to at the end of the process is correct. So we're not going to be there this year. We will be able to get assurance over certain balances. So pensions, Rob talked about, cash, valuations, we'll be making some progress on, and they're a point in time. We will get there on some of the other balance sheet captions, and we'll test things like payroll and to make sure that we know that, you know, at some point in time we'll be able to get that assurance over opening balance positions. But this is the situation that we're faced with. There's some challenges at Staffordshire as well. The ledger is hard work, and I think that is acknowledged by finance. It's hard work from an audit perspective. I don't think that's necessarily the case on a day-to-day. Well, maybe it is from Rachel's response, but we struggle with it from an audit perspective to get the detail out of the ledger, which also introduces time constraints into the process and makes it difficult to get the audit complete by that backstop position. But where I expect we will be is that we will work up to that backstop date. That's the expectation. We'll probably have done the vast majority of the procedures that we expect to be able to complete by November, December time. And then we go on a journey between December and February, basically trying to do that, some incremental work, which is kind of building back or restoring. Hold on, my clickers. Oh, there we go. I might have messed that up. I'll leave that alone. So we'll go on a journey which will basically be around trying to do some of the work that we need to do over those incremental balances. So that's kind of like our responsibility. So we really are, very, very keen to try and get back to where we should be in terms of the audit cycle. That's it's as much of a pain for us not having audits complete as it is for officers, and I mean that wholeheartedly. But there's some things that, it is a collaborative process. We're talking to Rachel and to Pete and the team around what we need from them. So I touched on the ledger, that is a challenge area, but we've made real strides into getting reports in a format that's, allow the audit to be delivered more efficiently over the past 12 months. And I think we're also, it's our second year, we've got the benefit of that 12 months under our belt. There is a whole programme of work for those who are interested called LARIGs, which are developed by the NAO, National Audit Office, to set out the processes and procedures that we need to go through. But they talk about the delays, the backstop, they talk about the rebuilding of assurance and the process that we'll go through to return to where we should be. But I think from your perspective as members, I think it's important that you hold us to account in asking us, are we making the right progress? Where are we up to where we should be in that process? How do we compare with other similar authorities, similar size authorities in terms of the work that we're doing? What are the issues that we're facing? Why aren't we able to overcome? Do we have the adequate resources to allow us to deliver those audits? What are the assurances that we're getting over those incremental procedures? How are we going about building back and making sure that we're on track to make sure that those audits are complete? So those are the kind of messages that I think I'd encourage you to continue to ask us, and also, equally challenge management as to whether they're satisfied with the way the audit process is being delivered, because it's really important that we are held to account in that regard. So we've probably gone a little bit over there just in time, but just the key messages or key takeaway messages, I suppose, in terms of what we've covered off. I'd encourage you to download the accounts. Clearly, that's our major area of focus. Have a flick through them. They will be, you'll take away from them what you take away, but the front end, I think, is helpful and sets out a lot of the standards and the reasons for what we're doing. That concept of materiality, it applies to our work, but it probably applies to your responsibilities as well as audit committee members, because we can't look at absolutely everything and we can't ask a question about absolutely everything. So it's really important that we focus on the stuff that's important and significant. You ask yourselves whether you're getting that assurance that you want, not just over the external audit process, but the reports that you're receiving from us, and we will make recommendations. I think it's important that you understand why we're raising those recommendations, and if we're finding errors or reporting numerical discrepancies, that you understand what the impact of those are. The value for money is all very much kind of our version of performing your role, asking officers what the arrangements are that are in place, and looking at the documentation that's publicly available and bringing that together to put into the public domain. And I've talked about the build back assurance process. It's a bit of a mess, but we will get there in terms of the accounts process returning to some semblance of normality in the future. So we'll pause. I don't know whether you've got questions, but happy to answer. I don't know whether we've got time for questions. I said about chair keeping us on track, and then I've rambled on.
Yeah, just for me, just for simplicity, we'll be able to get the link for the members for the accounts. Thank you.
For the accounts, I'm sure. Yeah, they're on the website, but I just googled Staffordshire accounts before, and it was the first link that came up. And Liam, you'll share the slides as we'll PDF them and get those sent around.
Councillor Clisett.
Thanks, Richard, for the presentation, and Robert. Just wanted to kind of look at the continuous monitoring side that you have. Obviously, the limited backstop at 24. When we're looking at risks and that continuous monitoring, are we looked at the current state in terms of dynamic risks that we've identified initially, and are there any blockers within Staffordshire County Council at the moment through audit results?
So we look at risks from two perspectives. We look at risks that impact the financial statements. They're probably not the same risks that officers consider on a day-to-day basis. So we're bothered about, is the pension liability fairly stated? And I'm sure that's probably relatively low down on officers' kind of list of things to do. But we do look at I take my accounts hat off and put my value for money hat on, and we look at the arrangements that are in place in terms of the council monitoring, or identifying and then monitoring and then taking action in respect of risks. So, do you have a risk register? Does it come through this committee? Is it challenged appropriately? Does it have the detail in to make sure that actions are taken and followed up? So we haven't concluded our VFM risk assessment work for 24-25 yet, but in terms of the commentary that went into public domain for 23-24, we didn't identify any issues in respect of the risk management process that we thought was kind of gave rise to a significant weakness.
Councillor Pert.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Two questions. Assuming local government reorganisation happens, and particularly with the backstop discussion, are you suggesting we're going to go into local government reorganisation without a clean set of accounts? That's the first question. Second question is, can you let me know how many hours are allocated to your work, please?
Do you want to find the hours? It could be that could be a situation, the LGR going in. I think that is a scenario, but we don't want it to be the scenario. Going back to what I said, our aspiration is to get the audit process, build back enough assurance to be able to issue clean opinions as soon as possible. That's our objective, and working closely with management to make sure that happens. But we have to work that process through. The accounts are really complex. You've got lots of reserves, lots of I&E, income and expenditure balances that we haven't got assurances over. You had disclaimed opinions for quite a few years prior to this, to 24-25. So we have to just work that process. But there is a scenario where LGR could come along before before you have kind of like a traditional clean opinion yet. But that applies not just here, that applies to many authorities. And then in terms of the audit effort.
Yeah, I mean, broadly the budget's around 2,500 to 2,750 hours for the audit. I think last year, probably more closer to 3,000, 3,250, given it was our first year. There's a lot to get to grips with. We'd look to bring that down slightly to make the process a bit more streamlined. Equally, the building back assurance piece that we've mentioned, that will incur additional hours and indeed additional fee, because that is additional work on top of the scope of the current audit. So, but I wouldn't like to put a number on the number of hours that will take, because it's a bit of a fact-finding point at this point in time.
Back, please. Thanks, particularly on the LGR response. It feels like it's not a shared risk. If you don't hit a clean audit by the time LGR happens, assuming it does, the risk all sits with the council. So that doesn't feel like a shared risk. And what is the council's view about getting to a clean set of accounts by LGR? Because it takes two to tango.
Looking faces.
if I can answer the second question. So I would say that we are as committed as Richard and his team are to getting to that clean opinion for the accounts. We're working with them, and Richard's already set out some of the improvements that we've made in the second year of working alongside KPMG. So I would hope that we will continue to make some improvements. I think during this year's audit, we have identified areas where we can improve for next year. So we'll continue to work on that and take it forward. And hopefully we'll be able to achieve that clean opinion in time. And certainly we will be sticking to the backstop dates at the very least.
Yeah, and just from our perspective, I mean, those backstop dates, have been put in place to make sure that to hold our feet to the fire in terms of concluding the audit processes for each of those years. We've developed a program of work with the NAO and the PSAA to risk assess that build back process, which we'll start to implement after we've concluded our kind of day-to-day audit work, as it were, for this year. So I expect that we will make some progress. And MHCLG also are very committed to this process. They're funding the build back additional work through a grant for which is available in 20 for you in 25, 26 and 26, 27 to cover off the work that we do. So there is it's really important to all of us that we get back onto a traditional reporting cycle.
Councillor Hayes, did you want to take a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, but I think you've answered all the questions that I was going to ask, actually. So I just wondered that if we didn't meet the deadline, would we be penalised by the government or anything like that?
So what happens is when you get to the backstop, basically we draw a line and I sign a disclaimed opinion at that point in time. There are exceptional cases where if we just haven't been furnished with a set of accounts, for example, then clearly we can't do that process. That doesn't apply here. I think that there's a list on probably gov.uk or MHC, or somewhere there's a list on the PSA website of those entities that haven't met the backstop, and then I presume that some sort of intervention will take place to tell people that they need to resolve that process, but it doesn't apply here, and it won't apply here, I don't anticipate.
Councillor Wallens?
Thank you, Chair. On about delays, how far back are they? Are they a few months, years, decades?
Well, we're up to date now in terms of we've issued the disclaimed opinions for 23-24. So we've met we met the previous backstop, and we'll meet the current backstop. But in terms of what that does is that just draws a line under that year. It doesn't kind of mean that you've got assurances over those financial statements. I think that they go back to 2019, 2020, 21, was it 21, 22? So you didn't have a kind of a full audit conclusion on every year's audit since then. But some work has been done, and the PSAA only pay the auditors for the work that has been completed.
Thank you. One more question I'd like to ask, Chair, is with delays and so forth, why do they happen? And how would you speed up the whole process to make sure you meet the deadlines on time and so forth?
I think I touched on that in terms of presentation for there's a real kind of, it was a combination of issues that impacted the sector in terms of why those delays manifested themselves. But I think, I'd rather look forwards than looking back now, and I think we can work very closely with Rachel and her team to make sure that our requirements are very clearly articulated, and I think audit has a right status within the organisation. The audit process has the right focus from the finance team to make sure then that we can move forward and meet those deadlines and get that incremental information that we need. We've got the right level of resource to enable us to meet those deadlines, and I think if we put that together, then combined with the backstop work that's going to be funded by MHCLG, then I think we stand a really good chance of getting back to where we should be.
Actually, one more thing I'd like to ask, Chair. I know, obviously, COVID and so forth, obviously, there's been major delays in that, but the years afterwards, like 22, 23 and last year, how many delays was there in auditing, delays and backstops and so forth?
Across the whole sector? I think there was hundreds and hundreds of sets of accounts. I mean, I've got, just from anecdotally, I mean, I think I've got issue probably 10 opinions across local government, and I think I've got 2 that are kind of up to date. So, there's a real, I have one that hasn't started for 23, 24, but the vast majority of our portfolio is through the backstop process, disclaimed opinions. So you're not alone, but I think everybody has an aspiration to move away from this position as quickly as possible, and that's what we're working to as well.
Cheers, thank you.
Any more questions? Francis?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you both for the presentation. Yeah, really good. I've got 2 questions. The first one is, beyond compliance, members would probably want to know if you also will provide insights into efficiency, fraud risk. That's the first part. The second part is looking at our situation. How confident are you about that timeline, 26, 27? Thank you.
So the fraud side of fraud, was it fraud you said? Yeah, fraud risk. So we have to follow the auditing standard that makes sure that we consider fraud. So we look at that from 2 perspectives. There's a rebuttable assumption that there's fraud risk associated with income streams, but then for public sector bodies, we also have to consider the expenditure side of the income and expenditure account, because you generally get your money in set income streams that and you spend it on a vast majority. It's the spend where there's the opportunity. So we do have a fraud risk over expenditure. We don't have a significant risk, but we consider the fraud risk over expenditure. We've rebutted that in the plan. Rob helping me out there. In terms of the efficiency side of things, that's not particularly part of our remit, but you can take the inferences from the value for money report. We're not reporting on efficiency savings, but we do look at the arrangements in place for you monitoring your savings plans. And then what was the final bit? That timeline. Yeah, the timeline. Well, I think we're confident that we'll do the work that we need to do at the right point in time, and then that theoretically that should get us to the right position. I think one of the things that it's the risk assessment piece that we'll do, and we'll bring those results through in what we call it our ISA 260, but it's the conclusions report. That should have some detail in there. We've got to do that work over the next 2 cycles, so we might not get through it all by the end of February, but we will continue it into the following financial year's audit. So we'll have a better view then, but equally you will, as well as committee members, because we'll report it through to you.
Okay, final question, Councillor Baker.
Thanks for the presentation. I was just wondering about, you said about difficulty about getting the information from the ledger. I just wondered about your challenges and why have you come across, and yeah.
So we're required to sort of extract all transactions from the ledger, so we can, pick populations and for our sampling, if we're looking at expenditure specifically or income, etc. The biggest challenge we've had is around sort of journals, and specifically looking at the journal transactions and how they sort of match. And because of sort of sub-ledger systems that operate within the wider Integra, that has become a bit of a challenge in terms of the matching exercise. The stand back is we're sort of comfortable that all balances sort of net to 0, which is what you need for any journal entered into the system. But in terms of us being able to sort of carry out detailed sort of risk assessment over that journalist population, that has been the biggest sort of challenge. And so we're working through about how we can effectively match that at the moment. But it's not as simple as extract, analyse, output when it should be. But again, it's just a limitation, I think, of the system.
Okay, moving on to item 15, National Fraud Initiative 2024 update. Debbie Owens, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides members with an update on the National Fraud Initiative 2024. Just by way of some further background, the NFI commenced back in 1996 and initially had its roots in the Audit Commission and subsequently since then, over more recent times, the Cabinet Office has taken on this function. So this is a national data matching exercise where a number of data sets are extracted from all public sector organisations and some private sector organisations as well. And it's all matched with the intention of trying to highlight fraud and error. It has been incredibly successful since its inception. Around about £2 billion worth of fraud and error has been detected, so it's well worth doing. We are mandated to participate anyway, but it really is worthwhile undertaking this exercise. So back in October 2024, we set about extracting all the data that we needed, and that goes off to the Cabinet Office. It goes off securely, gets put into their database, and then in December and January 2025, the results come back. A lot of the matches are actually fine, generally speaking. What it does do, though, it does give us an opportunity to make sure our records are up to date, but occasionally from time to time we will find fraud and error, and then it goes off to the service, the relevant service, to go away and investigate further. We do have, as an appendix to this report, a list of all the different types of matches that we get back and where we are to date, with a commentary on the right-hand side of Appendix 1. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions in relation to the detail of this report, but if not, I'll ask members just to note this report, please.
Councillor Pert.
I note that the amount of savings is, I'm assuming it is £1,837 rather than £1,837. And the cost of participation is 3,930 something or other. And presumably there's quite a lot of data matching that goes on behind the scenes, so there's presumably a lot of work that goes into finding £2,000. Is that the scope of what we're talking about, and is it really worth doing? And how many hours of labour is allocated into finding this 1,800 quid?
Well, at the moment, this is very much work in progress. We've got an awful lot of matches to look at yet, so that figure is likely to change. We are mandated as well to participate in the National Fraud Initiative, so it isn't actually an option. We have to. Over recent years, we have found quite a lot of fraud. However, what is testament to our own services is that we've adapted our services to try and pick up the errors before they've actually come through on NFI. And also, give a great example, previously we used to find a lot of error in relation to people that have died, but where we were continuing to pay for a care provision. As a result of that, we do our own internal checks and our own internal matching, which identifies that before it comes through to the NFI. So in one respect, the fact that we actually identify less fraud and error it is a good thing. And this then becomes a bit more of a housekeeping exercise and a check. We do put in the counter fraud plan 20 days to undertake this work, and that's every other year.
Just let me come back. Just because it's mandated by government doesn't mean we have to put in the 20 days. So we just need to be a bit careful that we're not just doing work because someone tells us to do work. Because, I would have that high on my list of efficiency that we don't need to be doing. I'll leave that with you to think about, but certainly, I don't think there has been a case made, for necessarily doing all that work for what's been delivered. But, maybe you'll come back another time and demonstrate that I'm completely wrong, because I'm more than happy to be proven wrong, but it doesn't feel like it from what I've just heard and seen.
In terms of what this actually provides back to the council, so obviously by submitting the data and submitting it to being scrutinised and checked against other data sources, it does help provide assurance that you've not got widespread fraud. So that's the reason for undertaking that piece of work, and that's the benefit to the organisation as well. Thank you.
Chair, can I just come back again? So we do go through each of those matches and we do sort of risk assess them in terms of what we want to look at. And you'll see some of the narrative in Appendix 1 where we are not going to review those matches because we don't think from past experience that it actually yields much of a return. So we do go through and we actually don't waste resources where we don't think it is necessary. Thank you.
Councillor Wallens.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of questions I want to ask. 16,000 matches, but only £1,837 recovered. How do we get tougher on chasing results so we can recover the amount of money that suspectedly, we're losing currently?
How do we get tougher on chasing them?
Yeah, because it only, as you say, 16,000 matches, only £1,837 recovered is a big difference, isn't there?
We've still got just short of 12,000 matches to look at the moment, so that figure is likely to change. Those matches have to go back through to the service and they will check to ensure that the records are updated. Sometimes they've already identified if there is an error in the reporting and will have corrected it by the time we get to look at it.
Thank you. And next question I want to ask is, I know blue badges and bus passes are still being used after people have sadly passed away. Why isn't this cancelled immediately once, obviously, the death of an individual has been confirmed?
We very much rely on the families to notify the council that somebody has deceased. So that tends to be why there is a delay that eventually does come through. Sometimes it is a timing delay. We do look at the Tell Us Once service as well, that we get privy to that data and we will update our records. Sometimes it's just it's the timing of when the reports come through.
I know, I may not know if this already exists, but can we not build a direct data link with the DWP to stop misuse immediately? I mean, when it comes to black badges and bus passes and so forth.
I'd have to look into that. I wouldn't know the answer at this time.
All right, no worries. One more question I want to ask. Conflicts of interest with staff are still under review. Isn't it time for quicker action? When it comes to, obviously, sorting out with the staff with the what's it called, conflicts of interest.
Could you just tell me what page that's on so I can go to it quickly, please?
One minute. I can't remember where I found that now, but it is on item agenda 5.
Is it the payroll to pay? Is it? Hold on.
I'll come. Do you want me to come back to that once I've found you on the report pack?
Is this the payroll to Company's House match?
Yeah, I believe it is, yeah.
Okay. Yep. We can look into that and come back to you because that match hasn't commenced yet. So if you could just bear with us, we'll look at that straight away.
Thank you.
Councillor Pendleton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would just like to ask, how are we using AI and data analytics to prevent future fraud?
You're sort of stealing my thunder now. When it comes to the progress report, you'll hear all about it. So we do have a continuous controls monitoring programme which continually looks at the council's data that we have available, and we do various checks around purchase cards, expenses, creditor payments, and I'll come on to that later, the next agenda item, just to give you a bit more detail.
Okay, moving on to item 16, Internal Audit Plan 25-26. Progress update, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the Internal Audit Plan Progress Report, and it gives members a flavour of the internal audit work that's been carried out to date against the 25-26 Internal Audit Plan, along with any amendments to the plan since it was approved back in April 25. So the first few pages of this report and the covering report provides a bit of background information to it. So it really does give a flavour and of the overview of the activities that are conducted by internal audit since April through to the 15th of September, which was the time of writing this report. And it does support, and it is intended to support, the work of the Audit and Standards Committee in obtaining assurance around the work of internal audit, and also that there are appropriate controls in place across the council. And you would have obviously seen already today and heard about a number of the reports and the outcomes of our work that have been brought through to the committee as part of the confidential agenda. So on page 186 of your pack and paragraph 3, this sets out a bit more of the legal background around audit and our mandate. So the accounts and audit regulations require that local authorities have an effective internal audit which reviews the overall effectiveness of the risk management, control and governance processes. And we also have to abide by the new global internal audit standards that came into force in April 2025, along with CIPFA's Code of Practice for the Governance of Internal Audit. And that requires me, one, to report regularly to the Audit and Standards Committee and provide you with necessary information that can give you the relevant oversight of the work that we do. So in terms of the detail and delving a bit closer into that, if I can ask you to turn to Appendix 1, which starts off on page 189 of your pack. So the progress reports in front of you today will talk you through some of the work that we've been up to since April, and also provide you some details of some of the amendments to the audit plan since April 2025. But also review also the performance and planning and some of the resource issues, and bring to your attention some of the key issues faced by the service at the moment, as well as give you a flavour for our external client work that's undertaken. And then finally, to look at the implementation and progress on implementing past audit recommendations. So in terms of work that's been conducted since April, as similar to previous years, the large part of the first few quarters of the year, we tend to work on undertaking grant verification exercises. There are a number of deadlines that we have to hit in terms of grant verification work, and I've just listed some of those on page 191 of your pack, such as the Disabled Facilities Grant, SEND 256 monies, Bus Service Operators Grant, local transport grants. There's a whole plethora of grant work that we have to do, and we have to give various grant letters back to the grant providers. We also continue to support various corporate initiatives as well during the course of the year. So moving on to page 192 of your pack. So in terms of revisions to the audit plan since it was approved in April 25, we've had 6 additional pieces of work that have been requested, and I've listed those on page 192 of your pack. But obviously we've only got finite resources, so we do have to keep in check what we have to deliver against our resources. And as a result of undertaking those 6 additional pieces of work, we have cancelled 5 pieces of work, which is Appendix A within the progress report. Where possible, we will look at some of the elements of that work as part of other audits that are still going ahead. If not, they will be reassessed as part of the annual audit planning process for 26-27. However, those cancellations will not impair my ability to inform and make the annual audit opinion for 25-26. Moving on, just by way of giving a quick staffing update. So during 24-25 and the first part of 25-26, we were running as a service with some vacancies. But I am pleased to report that during the summer we have appointed 3 auditors, very senior auditors actually. We're very lucky. 2 have already started back on the 1st of September with another person starting in mid-November. Where we still have some gaps in resources, we are using an internal audit framework agreement and also 1 agency member of staff just to cover that gap in resources at the moment. Moving on to page 193 of your pack, and this is where we start to delve into our performance measures. Our performance measures are documented in our audit strategy that came to this committee in April. So we have 2 key performance measures, one around the delivery of the audit plan, and the second one bringing out that quality aspect in terms of feedback from the auditees. And that's at figure 1. You'll see that table there with those documented. Figure 2 refers to the analysis of the delivery of the audit plan, and this is where we set just our own internal targets around where we want to be at certain parts of the year in terms of starting work. So for the rest of this report, for the first part of it, I'll look at the delivery of the plan. So at figure 3, you will see that for our systems audit work and our compliance audit work that forms the bulk of our audit plan, we have commenced 29% of the work so far as of reporting on the 15th of September. That is then split down into just the systems audit work on its own, and then also the compliance delivery as well. Overall, now that we have recruited, we are very hopeful that we're going to get back on track in terms of delivering, and actually we still are on schedule to complete all of our work by the end of the financial year. So we're not worried at this moment in time, and as a management team we do review and monitor the audit plan weekly, so we keep on top of that. Moving on to the counter-fraud activities, this starts off on page 195 of your pack. We split our work in terms of strategic and anti-fraud culture activities, our proactive work, and then also our reactive work. So we issue a number of communications to schools and across the corporate centre. During this first 2 quarters of the financial year, very much concentrating on purchase cards. We've done an awful lot of communications in relation to that. And we've also updated our internal audit and fraud pages of the intranet as well. We are shortly about to conduct a fraud survey across all staff, looking at trying to understand whether staff are fully aware of how they report fraud, and also around some of the key policy requirements that we have as well. Moving on to our proactive fraud activities, we did undertake a data matching exercise earlier in the year, looking at the Tell Us Once records, which records deceased persons, and checking that against active care provisions. That led to a recovery of just short of £4,000 relating to a care home that we were paying for a deceased resident. We've also carried out quite a lot of work in relation to purchase cards, and we've used AI to do some fuzzy data matching on luxury brands, and looking at all of the purchase card transactions for 24-25, and there were no adverse findings. We've since replicated that exercise from January 25 to August 25, and again, there were no adverse findings. In addition, we've undertaken two other proactive exercises in relation to purchase cards. One is in relation to gift cards that may be procured from time to time, to understand, one, what they're for, and two, if there is an outstanding balance on those where we hold the gift card so that they're not being given away as maybe a reward for a pupil, what happens to that? And we're currently undertaking another exercise in relation to purchase card cash withdrawals as well. That's currently ongoing at this moment in time. Moving on to our CCM works, this is our continuous controls monitoring. This is where we use a lot of different data sets, creditor payments, purchase card transactions, mileage and expenses, just to look at if we can highlight any fraud or error. There have been 8 duplicate invoice payments, just totaling just short of £8,500 that have been found to date. And also we're currently investigating 3 purchase card transactions because they've sort of a bit more unusual at this moment in time. So we're currently looking into those and talking to the people that have made those transactions just to make sure that it was legitimate and for business needs. In relation to school CCM, every term we undertake data analytics to identify schools that's sort of outliers around the non-approval of purchase card transactions, or where the purchase card holder themselves haven't reviewed and submitted receipts. And we liaise with those schools to understand in greater detail why they're doing what they're doing, and we just reconfirm the correct practices that they should be adopting. And earlier on, under our proactive counter-fraud work as well, we have the National Fraud Initiative, which you've received that report already. Moving on to reactive fraud activities. So to date, we've had 12 allegations of fraud. And this is detailed on page 197 of your pack. We've had one that was actually referred to us by the purchasing card team themselves, so they identified through their monitoring that there was some unusual transactions that had taken place relating to one purchase code holder. In respect of that, there were 9 transactions that were made during December and January 25. It turns out that the cash withdrawals, that money was held in a tin that was taken home for good keeping whilst there were renovation works being done at a home, a children's home. So that money has subsequently been returned, because obviously that shouldn't happen, and is now sitting back in council property. There was also another allegation around an employee's contracted hours, and again, when we went through that, we questioned the employee, and it turns out it was how they were actually recording their time on their timesheet, which looked like they were doing more hours than what was physically possible, but they were just recording it incorrectly within their timesheet. So again, there are recommendations around monitoring his time at the moment and how that's being recorded, and the oversight arrangements for that. There was another allegation in respect of a potential false application to a school. Again, there was no case to be answered because the actual address that the informant was telling us about was the address that the schools admissions team had, so there wasn't a case to be heard there. And there are further 8 investigations that are ongoing at the moment. In respect of our external client work, we also undertake internal audit work for South Staffordshire Council and Newcastle under Lyme Borough Council, and that generates income of around about £250,000 per annum. We tend to start their work a little bit later on in the year because they have smaller audit plans and a lot of their audit work is more financial. We tend to leave it till a bit later on in the year to undertake that work. Moving on to the quality assurance aspect and customer feedback. So from April through to September, our client satisfaction surveys that we've received, all of them have returned a score equal to good or exceeding good. So we're very happy with that. And then finally, talking about progress on the implementation of audit recommendations, we have an audit management system called K10, and as part of that we have an online portal that business users can go and update all their recommendations as and when they feel that they need to or things have moved on. And we report upon that to the Quality Improvement and Performance Board on a monthly basis. We're currently tracking 2,301 audit recommendations, and it is pleasing to note, if you look on page 199 of your pack, there are currently no high priority audit recommendations that are outstanding. There are 47 overdue recommendations, 8 of those are medium, with 39 being low priority recommendations. So again, thank you for the committee in terms of when you start to hear all these reports coming through and you hold officers accountable for the audit recommendations, and from time to time you will receive back progress reports. That really helps to keep people on track in terms of the implementation of their recommendations, coupled with our corporate reporting to QPIB board. That also helps in terms of keeping the number of recommendations that are overdue quite low. So, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions or comments in relation to that.
Moving on to item 17, proposed addition to the scheme of delegation. Heather Morgan, please. Thank you. Okay, just repeating the last one. Item 17, proposed addition to the scheme of delegation. Heather Morgan, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, this item is a request for an addition to the scheme of delegation for the Director of Finance and Resources to authorise the making of a definitive map modification order when directed to do so by the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, following an appeal by the applicant against a decision of the County Council not to make the order. By way of background, the County Council has a duty to determine applications which have been made under Section 53 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 to modify the definitive map of public rights-of-way when there is evidence that an error exists. For example, this could be by not showing a public right-of-way which exists in law, or by showing the incorrect status of a public right-of-way. Where the County Council refuses to make a definitive map modification order, the applicant has a right of appeal against that decision pursuant to Schedule 14 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. The appeal will be heard by an inspector of the Planning Inspectorate on behalf of the Secretary of State, and the inspector has the power to either dismiss the appeal, which means that the County Council's decision would stand, or to allow the appeal, and in those circumstances the Secretary of State will then direct the County Council to make a modification order. When a direction is received, the County Council must then authorise the order to be made. This is a routine decision, as the County Council has no power to refuse to do so. But the authorisation is needed to enable the modification order to be sealed by the County Council. This authorisation currently sits with the Countryside and Rights of Way panel. This request was considered by that panel on the 12th of September, and the panel resolved to support the request and asked that any decisions made under this delegation be reported back to the panel. Consequently, the committee is now being asked to support the proposal set out in paragraph 7 of this report, which is to support an addition to the scheme of delegation for the Director of Finance and Resources to make a definitive map modification order where the County Council has been directed by the Secretary of State to make such an order following an appeal by the applicant against the County Council's decision to refuse to make the order, and to report any decisions made under this delegation to the Countryside and Rights of Way panel. With the committee's support, the proposed addition to the scheme of delegation will then be referred to full council with the recommendation that it be approved and that the Constitution and the scheme of delegation be updated accordingly. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, I recommend that the committee support the proposed measures set out in paragraph 7 of this report. The proposed addition to the scheme of delegation be endorsed and referred to the full council with the recommendation that it be approved and that the Constitution and scheme of delegation be updated accordingly. Are we all in agreement?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item 18, forward plan for the Audit and Standards Committee. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the standing item on the agenda that outlines the proposed agenda for the next meeting of the committee, and also forward-looking as well for the remainder of the civic year. Please can I just draw to your attention the change of date for the meeting from the 4th of November through to the 29th of November. That meeting request should have gone into diaries, Liam. Yeah, correct. So happy to take any questions in relation to the proposed content of next time's agenda or anything within the forward plan as well. Thank you.
Just one from me. With the AMI contract, we have a planned internal audit included in the 2024-26 internal plan and audit review on highways expenditure. As part of that, we include a review of the highway inspection service by Councillor Clisett. However, at this moment, there is an investigation in this service conducted by Audit, and therefore there is a request that the investigation is concluded before the audit is undertaken. Thank you.
Just one from me. So in terms of the investigation, will this committee have the full findings presented in the next committee meeting?
Yes, we can bring it to the Audit and Standards Committee when it's concluded, and also if it does go to the police, there might be a delay in it coming through to the committee. We will have to take advice from the police at that time.
Okay, and in terms of my presentation, in terms of today, I know we're out of time now, but would it be beneficial that I get a chance to kind of talk about Burntwood and my experience in Burntwood based on what I found?
Yeah. Yeah, so we can bring the terms of reference through for the planned audit review on the AMI contract to this committee. Yeah.
Councillor Welland.
Thank you, Chair. It's not very much a question, but I did back Councillor Clisett's proposal to conduct an investigation. Because, yeah, I do agree, because some roads in my constituency and the poor timing of road works as well is always, you know, we need to hold Amy to account on that one. But, yeah, it's a good one on that one.
I think in terms of what I've witnessed probably over the last 2 months really is that we probably do need a recommendation of an external audit rather than an internal audit carried out by Staffordshire County Council based on what I've seen. And I wanted to kind of share with you quite an in-depth kind of review in terms of that and the evidence, but I think we've run out of time now. So it's probably what I would request is that I'm given that time either in an ad hoc meeting with the officers to discuss it offline, you know, but I absolutely want to make sure that we have a review and a proposal that's put forward that this is a third party you know, audit provider that's carrying out full tests, looking at where we had non-compliances and also calling that out in terms of remedial action straight away.
Thank you. In terms of the additional information, yes, we can arrange a meeting outside of the formal committee meeting in terms of that. And obviously we'll work with our external audit colleagues as well in respect of that request. Thank you.
Okay, before we conclude, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to all the committee members for their thoughtful contributions and oversight, to our officers for their thorough preparation and reporting, to our guests for their valuable insights, and to everyone in attendance for their engagement and support. Thank you. Your collective efforts continue to uphold the principles of transparency, accountability and good governance. If there are no further matters to address, I now formally close the meeting, and thank you once again. I look forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thanks.